In terms of Victorian or 19th century furniture, things get out of hand. The entire paradigm of furniture manufacturing is going to shift, and it's going to move towards factories. Almost all of the furniture you're going to see from the middle of the 19th century up until the present is made in a factory somewhere. No matter how quote-unquote fine it is, you're not having one person build one chair at a time. Instead, we're starting to use assembly lines to move the process along. This makes factory work or factory furniture cheaper, so it's available to the masses, but it does cause some problems with quality, as you would know if you've been to any of those certain home furnishing stores with blue and yellow sort of colorations that tend to use particle board and horse meat to build their furniture today. But at this time, it's mostly solid wood construction or plywood construction. Now, when we look at furniture of the period, generally what you're looking at is something blocky, something rectilinear, and then you're going to have ornamentation added on top of it. In this case, you see those fixtures and hinges being added as a decorative element. The wood becomes more important, but oftentimes the wood is not finished in the same way. And we see a lot of glossy shellac finishes, often to hide the fact that this wood has not been properly sanded and polished as would be necessary for a good oil finish. Now, the traditional oil finish on almost all furniture up until this point requires a lot of maintenance. You have to oil it once a week, for a month, once a month, for a year, once a year, for a lifetime. And in the act of polishing, you often would sand it down a little bit and work on it, and it would get this very beautiful, smooth patina. As we move into this period, we see the use of shellac much more often. They're spraying it on. It's really quick. It's a glossy finish. And today you would see it as this weird scaly finish, almost orange peely, as it reacts with moisture in the air over 150 years and really reconstitutes into little individual drops of shellac. But I get off point. We also see the use of lamination. Lamination. And here they're using thin pieces of wood and they're gluing them together. So think of using veneers or something a little thicker than veneer, and you're gluing it together using a mold. And it could be a very simple mold. In this case, just a curved mold. These pieces are not pre-cut other than the overall shape. So all those cutouts that you see here would be done later, easily done with a drill, for example. But those are going to be laid in place and glued in that mold. As long as the glue is wet when the mold is applied, you will allow it to dry and it will come out as a beautiful curve. And you can create incredible compound curves. Let me remind you that all the way up to the 1980s, a lot of boats, especially racing kayaks and that sort of thing, were built with this method. And so they can hold incredible shapes. We will see the use of coil springs. Up until now, cushions are generally simply filled with horsehair or feathers or whatever soft material you happen to have. But we see the use of coil springs or sprung seats. Now, sprung seats are advantageous because now I don't have to fill it with a lot of material. The springs are very comfortable. The problem is these ties. If you've ever reupholstered or you ever get the chance to reupholster an old chair of this period, the canvas beneath it has to be strong. The ties have to be strong because if these start to go, then these springs start working independently and can go through the seat, which is a bit of an issue. The seat over it generally has some kind of cushion, although very thin, before you get to the coil so that you don't touch the coil with your butt, basically. It would be incredibly uncomfortable. But we see coil springs predominantly from the middle of the 19th century onward. So if you're looking at a piece that should be earlier than that and it has coil springs, well, you've got a problem. We're going to see revivals. And of course, these revivals take on almost a fantasy air. For example, this stool is supposed to be Egyptian revival. And while it's a beautiful stool, it is not Egyptian. The Egyptians would not have created that. That being said, it's a beautiful form. They're just working with what has been there before. They're sampling, for lack of a better term. But we tend to see really ornate revivals. This is sort of Victorian sci-fi furniture, for lack of a better term, creating an air of fantasy. What could have been if they just knew how to do the stuff we know how to do. We see a lot of Bentwood furniture. This is really, really common, especially lower in the market. In fact, I appraised a chair identical to this just this past weekend. And Bentwood means that they're taking these pieces, these turned pieces, and they're steam bending them. So I can put them in a steamer, pull them out, bend them around a mold, let them sit and cool, and it will hold that shape. And it's actually incredibly strong. You're basically using the advantages of the arch form, and it's a solid piece of wood. You will see the same for rocking chairs, which start to become popular in this period as well. But that's a whole different topic. The seats can be caned or solid wood, or they can be that woven material that we've seen, the woven rush that we've seen up until this point. But you'll see that curve in the back of the legs, for example, in this one, very similar to the Klismos chair, although they're curving the front too to give it a little bit of a peel. But let's talk about that seat. How did they do that seat? And by the way, it was used for high chairs and just about anything they could use Bentwood for. That seat is press back. Now, press back means that instead of carving this relief into this flat surface, typically a chair rail, but sometimes a seat or any other crest rail or a seat, and you can see it anywhere. What they do is they have a giant roller with this pattern on it, and you roll the piece through the roller and it leaves this pattern. It's an interesting form, and the way to tell press back apart from relief is, first of all, it's going to be very, very shallow relief. And secondly, if you look at the edges here, the wood actually curves down. Instead of, if this were carved, it would be cut off and you would see end grain instead of seeing the grain from the side or lateral grain. As we would see in these examples. You can have incredible detail, but remember, if you see press back, it means it's mass manufactured. Those presses still exist today, and we still use them in different forms. They're using exactly the same technique for that embossed wallpaper that I talked about in a previous video. We're going to see a lot of hybrids and revivals. We're going to see a lot of furniture that's mixing forms. And so a lot of times, if you're trying to identify it, you need to look at construction methods. And don't be surprised if you see something that has Renaissance ideas and Louis XV ideas or Louis XIV ideas. Rococo mixed with Baroque, mixed with neoclassical. It's all coming together in this period. So when you're decorating, you need to keep that in mind. You may not find quote unquote pure furniture, something that is purely Gothic revival or purely some other form. You're going to often find pieces with characteristics from various forms. Which again brings us to the issue of dating and construction. And of course, you can look at any number of things. Here, if you look at the back of a drawer or the face of a drawer, how is that dovetail laid out? That can tell you what period you're likely looking at. You can see other forms like this scalloped and doweled form, which is common from 1870 to 1890. You look at the construction techniques, the material, the style, all to try and pick out what period that furniture is. And unfortunately, in interior design, a lot of clients will expect that you know this, just like, say an art and antique appraiser who is supposed to know all of these things. It just becomes part of what they assume or assumed knowledge, and that can be a dangerous thing. So educate yourself on these things as much as possible. Just trust me, it will be incredibly useful to you.